All right, Gloria and Excelsis Deo. We should be live. We should be live. I'm not entirely sure, but it looks like we're coming on. So thank you. Today we're just going to do a quick stream on forgiveness. Forgiveness is probably one of the hardest things that we do. It's actually the first point. I'm just going to get right into everything because I don't have tons of time. I have to take my son over to school. So the universe is primarily instructing in forgiveness. Also, thank you so much for joining me and for hanging out. If you're live or later, I really appreciate it. So I've been a little busy. I haven't even changed shirts from yesterday, so I'm a bit of a slob. Forgive me. But basically, the universe is primarily instructing in forgiveness and acceptance. This is like sort of the core lessoning that's kind of happening here in many different ways. We're meant to relinquish our activities that are not from integrity. And then we're also meant to forgive those activities that are not in integrity, both in ourselves and then from others. Now, a lot of people, before we get started, a lot of people think of forgiveness as like they sort of get this idea that in order to forgive, we also have to basically, we're saying it's okay that what we did or what they did, whatever, is okay, and that we're condoning it. And it's not actually about any of that. What forgiveness really truly is about releasing yourself from the burden, the emotional burden of purviewing the reality as having a mistake in it. So when we see the reality around us and we perceive that there's an error here, that there's a mistake in the creation, we will feel bad somehow. That's always the case because essentially, you might remember our good friend Jesus, who said, "Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do." He also said, "Judge not, lest ye be judged." And that's essentially what we're looking to do here is when you judge another or yourself, you're always judging the reality and always judging yourself because you are the reality. So it always ends up feeling bad, always, pretty much. So we want to understand that the universe is primarily instructing in forgiveness, and that forgiveness and acceptance is what paves the way for peace. That's what paves the way. You can't really be peaceful with someone if you're not forgiven, if you haven't forgiven them for whatever thing has happened, right? And it's the same with yourself. And a lot of us start to get to a place where we can forgive others really easily. We can forgive others without any major problems. We can let go of things with others a little easier, but we don't do it as well with ourselves. So today we're going to focus on ourselves. And we're going to do that by using what I would call reason or wisdom or logic to try and help restore an understanding that you did not do anything wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. You behaved at the level of frequency that your consciousness was at that moment, or through that period of lifetime, in multiple moments. You were not sort of aware primarily of what you were doing in those moments. Socrates said something along the lines of all men choose to do, men and women, but what he said was all men choose to do what they perceive as the best thing. That's not the exact quote. That's not what he said, but it's basically what he said. He said that we all choose to do what we perceive as to be the best thing. Now, so you can imagine when we have beliefs that are kind of fearful and we have compulsions to do things in relationships or whatever that sort of don't really align, right? Like that's primarily what we're learning to forgive. We did those things because we held beliefs that were out of harmony with our truer self or our truer nature or our divinity. And when we act out of alignment with that, we're going to feel worse and worse. And the longer that the more we work on raising vibration and taking more energy in, and then we continue to do unaligned things, that's going to feel worse and worse. Basically because we're not sustaining the vibration properly. And so it starts to feel like we're not, we may not even feel like we're alive in many cases. Like we may feel very deadened if we're doing things that are unaligned, and we feel really bad about ourselves. So this is primarily about self-love and about trying to treat ourselves sort of the same way we would unconditionally love a child. And I'm sure we all have if we don't have a son or a daughter, we probably have a nephew, a cousin, or a younger member of the family somewhere that it's just like, you unconditionally love them. They're little kids and then you just love them, right? So we're trying to have that sort of same observation of ourself while also being observant of like, where did I make the error? The error was not a mistake. The error was just an error in perception. I was threatened. I felt threatened by something that I presumed could threaten me, and then I acted out. Or I even could have been just threatened by my feelings. I could have just been upset by my feelings. So one of the first things we want to try to do is we want to try to depersonalize things. Not to detach, but just to review what's going on, right? We need to separate the the person in the situation that's done something wrong, which in this case we're talking about ourselves. So we have to realize there's kind of two aspects of us that act, right? There's our egoic self that either acts in integrity and truth, or it acts out of fear and non-integrity. That's the ego, and it kind of acts one or the other way. So the ego can be acting in truth in a fairly positive nature, but it also can be acting out of fear. Generally, what we're trying to do is form our egoic expression into being more aligned, into being something that's like something that we can be okay with how we've shown up, because it's shown up in truth. So it's not going to unsettle us as much. But we want to try to basically notice that we have those two separate components to us, and the two separate components are not really relevant to each other so much. Our true nature is our divine innocent self. The divine innocent self is the self that we are sort of loving. Like, that's how we should see ourselves as. We should see ourselves as that self, not as the self that got reactive and did the thing. Because that's not truly us. That's not truly who we are. That's just a compulsory or a compulsion-based or even addiction-based fear response, usually, which causes us to act in an unloving way. So we can just know that basically when I'm acting that way, I was confused about something, and it was my confusion that caused me to act this way. And actually, if I didn't act that way, then maybe I wouldn't have noticed that I have this compulsion. Like, that's sort of the purpose of it, is to notice where we get swayed into unloving activity. And then to forgive that and accept that. Our conscience lets us know, right? Our conscience says, that behavior wasn't quite, that wasn't quite good. And then what we do is, with our beliefs about ourselves, because we tend to hold a lot of negativity about our own being, we then sort of dump all that on top of it and shame ourselves for that behavior. And so what I'm trying to just recommend is that we don't have to go through that extra process. We can notice the conscience say, oh, that wasn't really aligned. And we can just notice what might be better aligned later. Like, what about that incident that happened? What about the thing that I did that, how could I approach that differently? And most of the time, it's about actually looking at the belief, not so much the behaviors. So as humans, we tend to look at, like, trying to fix the behavior. Like, I'm going to stop the behavior. But I just have a secret for you. You won't stop the behavior until you challenge and dissolve the belief that inspired the behavior. It is not the behavior itself that is the core of the issue. The behavior is a result of the belief. So we have to correct the belief. Otherwise, the behavior will cycle. And this is why we keep making the same mistakes. We call them mistakes. They're not mistakes. They're errors in perception. But we keep making those, and then we keep looking at those going, I know better. Why don't I stop doing this? And it's because you don't know better. That's the thing. You haven't changed the belief, so then you'll repeat the same error. And when you repeat that error, then you'll beat yourself up about it again. So what I'm trying to help do is help you develop a process for yourself to look at your actual thing that you feel that you did wrong, and how to transition out of all the shame and the negative emotions about it, and to just focus on learning from it. And in that way, you can actually be like, at the very least, my focus upon the corrective belief and the learning is my restitution. Like, that is how I'm gonna resolve this, how I'm going to do my best to try and reframe my world in myself so that I don't continue to act that way, right? That can be your restitution. That is your way of apologizing sort of to the universe, is by like, yes, I see what I did, and I'm gonna look at why I did it that way, and then I'm gonna try and see if I can notice next time I feel inspired to do that or motivated to do that from fear. Next time I'm gonna catch it, and I'm not gonna do that. And in that way, that's our job. When we do something that we feel is wrong, that's the job that's ahead of us, is to look at it deeply and to let it go. And then, once we've looked at it and grasped the lessons from it, it doesn't really serve our learning anymore, and we can just let it go. We don't have to hang on to all the pain. The pain doesn't really help us. As a society, we tend to believe that if we're not damning something or condemning ourselves or something else, that thing won't be inspired to change. And that's actually not how it works, because we're self-corrective naturally. So life is self-corrective naturally, right? All life does this. It evolves and changes and tries to do the best thing for its survival. And that's what we always are doing. And so you can actually think of any of your fear responses as misguided, animalistic survival instinct. That is what it is. We've progressed so much with our intellect and our technology, but what we haven't progressed with too much, actually, is our animalistic instinct. Most of the population of the world is operating on a consciousness level that's below integrity. And so we all get pulled into this. And actually, when other people are acting below integrity, so in falsity, in falsehood, we actually tend to get triggered into joining them in that behavior. Because we vibrate in it, and we're like, this isn't good. And then I'm going to respond because my ego says that this is bad. And, so someone else can bring to us frequencies, and we can actually thank them for this, because it's what they bring this to us. It brings it up in us, and then we can let it go. So you can see there's multiple levels of like learning happening here with all different sorts of things. So after you've separated and compartmentalized between the divine self and the egoic self, you can really look at how the ego has claimed ownership and authority over everything that happened. You can remember divine perfection. And this is how you're going to restore faith. So if you're on a spiritual path, most likely you've learned about divine perfection. You may not believe in it quite yet, but what we're trying to do is establish a belief, a foundational belief in divine perfection. We're trying to understand that divine perfection is, the universe is here to serve itself, right? It is here to expand, and we are the universe, and the universe is teaching us. We're students of the universe, which is ourselves. We're students of ourselves, and we always are teaching ourselves as gently as we can figure out how to do. Now, sometimes we go so astray that it feels like the universe just slaps us in the face. You can equate this sort of to something like, if somebody gets knocked unconscious, You get them the smelling salts, or you might slap them to wake them up, right? Because normal stimuli doesn't wake them up. The universe does the same thing. So if we're making sort of the same mistakes over and over, we end up building on that and building that energy, and eventually it just slaps us in the face and we're forced awake. We're like, whoa, what was I doing? So it's a perfect self-corrective mechanism, and we can essentially we can essentially leave it to God. Any of that vengeance or revenge or vengeful thought, retaliation and all that stuff, we can leave all of that to God. We don't need to retaliate, especially on ourselves. Like we've had a hard enough time, most of us, right? So we don't need to actually add layers of pain on top of what we've already done, or what's already transpired. We don't want to create new wounds, right? We want to continually let go of what we've just done. And again, we're not ignoring any of it. We're really deeply actually looking at what we've done. But in order for us to really look at it, we have to be somewhat okay that we did it, right? We have to be somewhat okay that I did it. We have to first know the process to forgiveness is very simple, but it's challenging to do. We have to first know what the error was. What error did I make here? Error, again, is not mistake. It's an error in perception. I perceived something in my reality which caused me to act out. What was that? And how did that form in my experience? Then we have to accept that that's what I did. We don't want to get involved in all of the I did it because this person did that, and this because. But we don't have to do any of that stuff. We can, of course, we can investigate these things, and certainly there's story there. And the story can help us understand, like, if a person did the XYZ and we perceived all those things as really bad, and then we retaliated, then it's part of the reasoning that we use, that the ego used to retaliate, right? Oh, I've been threatened, I've been pushed against, my sovereignty's been questioned, my whatever. Now I'm gonna fight back, defend, I'm gonna engage in conflict. And usually after we engage in conflict, we end up feeling not as great about it. Now, if our consciousness level is lower, the conflict actually helps to make us feel powerful a little bit. It helps us to feel a little better. Now, it's a kind of an illusory, it's kind of a gunky, thick kind of energy. It's not going to consistently sustain people that are attempting to hold a higher vibration. So the conflict energy of like drama, back and forth drama type stuff, that's just gonna be like, ugh, it's gonna get to that place. And we don't have to get upset with ourselves. We just have to let go of that type of behavior. We're kind of used to being a little dramatic with each other, pretty much over everything, because we're all so tightly wound. Not all of us, but lots of us are so tightly wound up. And like I said, most of the population, I don't remember the exact numbers. Dr. David Hawkins in Power vs. Force and Truth vs. Falsehood, as well as The Eye of the I and Transcending Levels of Consciousness, talks about the human population being at approximately, he was saying 22% are above the line of integrity. That was a few years back, so it's probably higher now. But still, much more than half of our populace on the planet are pretty much walking and living in falsity. And they're not aware of it. It's not their fault. They don't have any mechanism to notice. We actually, when we're born, we're essentially like blank slates, innocent souls, right? We're just innocent. We don't know what's going on, and we have no real capacity to discern truth from falsehood that we are taught or understand as kids. Now, the quickest way, just to show you, is to make a true statement and push on your hands like this. So if I say, my name is Sean, and I push, there's no resistance, or there's a lot of resistance, strong resistance. If I say my name is Bilbo, my fingers just close immediately. There's no, the body goes weak in response to falsity. So that's the quickest way. This is a pretty accurate test. You can use it on literally anything. Like I could say something like, today is perfect. Today is perfect. That's true. So we can use this, and that's been studied a lot. Like I said, I recommend Dr. Hawkins. Check out his work because he really changed the world, honestly, with that kind of understanding with the kinesthetic muscle testing for truth versus falsehood. And I'm going to get a little bit more into the consciousness map in a minute. So we want to understand what negative feelings drove us to act in the way we did, right? We want to understand what happened. And so typically we're going to be experiencing some sort of pride, anger, desire, fear, grief, apathy, guilt, or shame. We may experience a whole mix of these things. Sometimes what happens is we'll get so low, we'll get straight down into shame. Actually, let me switch over to my my chart here of consciousness levels because this will help to illustrate this a little bit better. So basically, the more than half of the population are below this critical level of integrity. This is at the consciousness level of 200. That means most people are primarily operating from pride, anger, desire, fear, grief, apathy, guilt, and shame. Now, what can happen is when we experience something that we've done that we feel bad about, we can fall all the way down into shame with ourselves. And then as a sort of self-protective mechanism, we'll tend to then project, not always, but we'll often project that onto another. So we'll go down into shame. And what we're trying to do is look at like what emotions, like what caused me to act in this compulsive way? What caused my ego? It wasn't me. That's the thing. It's not me who did it. It was the ego. If I was awake and conscious in that moment and mindful, I wouldn't have done that thing, right? We wouldn't have, because we would have been acting from truth and from peace. So the ego did it. Now, it doesn't mean we just like go, oh, well, I wasn't even there. But it's just about going, okay, the ego did it, and now it's my job to tame that, right? In order to tame that, we have to understand how it works a bit. And so what happens is we'll get into one of the lower states of consciousness, the lower frequencies, because we feel really bad about what we just did or what we're observing, and then we may project it out to another and then act. That's often when we've acted out in some way. That's often what's happened. We feel bad about ourselves, and quickly, even sometimes before we notice we feel bad about ourselves, we're already compulsively protecting that by projecting that out, and then using our pride, anger, or desire or fear to then kind of act and make some type of action. And so when we do that, we are going to create situations that were not done in integrity. And then we're going to resent those in some way eventually. The ego doesn't actually stop until around 600 here. So up until around here, we're sort of like building a aligned ego. We're building a accepting ego, an ego that's willing to participate. It has courage. It takes a lot of courage as well from our ego, sort of, to not engage in some of these like more harsh activities, so some of these less integrous activities. It takes courage for us to have all that feeling of fear or pride or resentment or whatever it is come up and then not do anything about it. This is why managing our compulsions is so critical. Like just noticing when I feel some type of compulsion and then just choosing not to, if we don't feel the compulsions aligned. One of my compulsions, for example, is like constantly, sometimes I'll make just coffees. I love coffee. I love how it tastes, but it's got caffeine in it. So if I drink a bunch of it, I'm going to have problems. And sometimes I'll like get compulsive and I'll drink a bunch of coffee. It's just a silly one, but it's actually these little compulsions that we can actually learn a lot from, because it teaches us a lot about our compulsion. Like, part of the reason I drink so much coffee and caffeine is because I constantly feel exhausted. I'm sure many of you can relate to this, especially lately. The energy is just, I felt like this probably most of my life, just really tired. Like I don't know if it's just that the way that I am, most of my energy is used for something else. I don't know, but in the body, I just don't feel very energetic most of the time. Like, most of the time doing stuff, I'm kind of like, all right, it's time to do stuff. But so the energy of our shame and our guilt and our fear, we project it onto other people. And that's primarily what causes us to act in disharmony with them. It's not so much anything about what they did. Again, remember, we want to impersonalize, depersonalize what happened, and notice that the divine self was sort of ignored, basically. And that's what happens when someone's acting unconsciously and they could spend their whole life unconscious and just be very like sort of greedy and controlling and all that stuff for their whole life. And those are the hardest situations for people to forgive, especially if they're like, we're looking at a CEO that's been doing horrible things and getting called out. It's hard to forgive these things because we're like, they should know better. But the truth is that they don't know better. If they did know better, then they wouldn't do it. So that's sort of what we want to remember about ourselves as well. If we knew better in that moment properly, we wouldn't actually go do the thing that we know is to be not in integrity or not aligned with our core belief values, which are generally peace, grace, forgiveness, mercy, love. This is what most of us are called to try to feel, right? And we can get really upset when that feeling is challenged. So a lot of us will actually have a pretty solid foundation of self-love, but then we start talking to people. And then we get challenged, right? Because people they do things and we don't like the things they're doing. And they say things and we don't like those things. And a lot of that, I don't like this, I don't like that, is exactly where that shame stuff comes up. That's our shadow talking, more or less, right? Our shadow is saying, I'm not supposed to be here like this. Like, I'm not supposed to be in the experience this way. I'm not allowed to be in the experience this way. And then the ego will react to that. So when we're in ourselves, we can just notice that we felt bad. Then we did this thing. We were governed by our fear, and it was perfect because now we can see all of our fear. Now we can see all of what led us to that, and we can change it. Like, we can change our beliefs. I used to be an atheist. And I am clearly not an atheist anymore. So first I was an atheist, then I became an agnostic because I was like, you know what, I just don't know. Agnostic, at least, is a kind of a truthful way of approaching spirituality. Like, what I realized was that men and women don't get it really. At least what I had seen. So I didn't trust any of the work. Why am I talking about that? Oh, because beliefs can change. So we change our beliefs, right? It's obvious. We change our preferences, things shift. It's the same thing. We're malleable, dynamic beings. We just have to pay attention to what we're believing. So if we believe that mistakes exist, if we believe that we're not perfect as we are, and we believe that we have to constantly impress other people or do something specific, like, we're going to end up creating these situations where we feel that we did not do enough, which is what ends up or we didn't show up properly, which is what causes that shame feeling that we then project. So you can see that it's all about self-love. All of it's about self-love and self-forgiveness. If you're not holding like this idea that you can do something wrong to people when you're acting out of peace and love, Like if you're just acting out of peace and love, you cannot really go wrong. Like, you know what I mean? But if you're worried about acting wrongly and feeling like you may act wrongly and feeling like you're going to act wrong, then that's when shame and all these other negative emotions come in, because I did my thing, I acted as I act, but I have a belief that others don't accept me, let's say. And then somebody comes and says, that what you just did there, that felt horrible. Like, you shouldn't have done that. Why couldn't you have done this or this or this? And we're confronted then with the insanity of the ego. The insanity of the ego confronts us directly then, because they're asking us a question that is unanswerable. They're asking us, why did you do what you did? Why didn't you do something else? And you don't know. Like, you have reasons. You can make reasons up. I did this because this and this and this. Those are your reasons in the story. But truly, you just did as you did. There wasn't a lot of, especially if it was a negative thing, it was mostly compulsion. It was mostly unconscious. There were probably parts of it where you're like, oh, I don't know if I should say this or do this, but I did it anyway. But that's just the compulsion overriding, right? Overriding your sort of conscience that's telling you, you probably should pump the brakes here. And so that's what always is what's precipitating any unloving behavior. And when we don't feel the shame, so if we approach someone and do stuff, but we have shame inside about ourselves, eventually somebody's going to mirror that to us and say, oh, how you just were is wrong. They're going to mirror it. And we need to forgive ourselves first, and forgive them. It's us. If they said that and we didn't hold shame in ourselves, we wouldn't care at all. It wouldn't affect us, because we would just sort of notice that what they just said is nonsense. Like, oh, why didn't you just do this or this, or why won't you be this way? You realize that that's just nonsense. I was how I was because that's the way I thought I could be. If I thought to be the other ways and thought that those were the way, I would have done those things. I'm sorry for not being able to read your mind. And this is what the ego expects. The ego expects that people can read their mind, like, very accurately. It expects that the people that they can tell us all the various prescribed things that it wants, and then we'll consistently deliver all those things. Because the ego sees other people as possessions, more or less. Possessions and toys to be played with, means to some end or some outcome. And this is why we don't tend to really experience love until we step out of some of that ego. So you can see that there's a whole whack of consciousness levels here, a whole whack of them. Duality ends here at 600. That's where duality ends, and you start to step into nonlinear. So I've stepped into this area before, and I kind of come in and out, and I kind of go up and down. I'm not sure how to explain it or why this is happening this way, but I go up and down, and then I still am dipping into lower frequencies as well. And so I thought that it was important to tell people that, because it can seem like some people, especially people like myself who are talking about these things and seem to know what we're talking about, because we do. I do, because I've explored it a lot. And of course, just take whatever I say with a grain of salt and discard it if it doesn't resonate. But we tend to think that those people know what's going on, like, in a perfect way. And of course, there are teachers that are more in a perfect sort of state of joy or completeness. Sadhguru comes to mind. He strikes me as he's being in that state. Now, we will get triggered and out of that state and test that state gets tested. That's why we're here. So you couldn't have done any better. You have to basically, the reason for the mistake or the error or the whatever we call that was in order to do this process to try and change the belief that inspired the mistake to even exist. And so we can imagine that if our partner says something that hurts us, and maybe we don't retaliate, but we just feel really bad about it. We can forgive ourselves literally for believing that what they said is true. They projected onto us, right? And we believed them to some degree. That's why it hurt. Otherwise, it wouldn't hurt. We don't have to believe them. If somebody says something negative about us, don't believe them, you know? Good morning, Joe. You joined just a little bit late. I'm just about to get off, but I hope you're able to rewind and have a look. I think this is an interesting one. Hopefully you and Jamie like it. If you get a chance to watch it, that would be awesome. That's the path to stop making the same errors, though, is noticing the belief that brought about the non-integrous behavior. I believed that I was threatened by this person's words, so then I called them a butthole or whatever, right? So then I did these things because I believed that they said something, and that hurt me. It only hurts because you believe it a little bit about yourself. That's the only reason it hurts. The rest of the reason that it hurts is because you then layer a bunch of story on it about how that person was evil for doing that to you and saying these things. And then you can go into the stories of where this actual belief formed from in your childhood, and you can heal those things too. What I would suggest is that you don't actually have to do that. That stuff will naturally clear itself out over time if you just address the core belief. It'll all fall apart. And I think that's everything. That was a lot. Thank you guys. Thank you, Joe. Thank you everyone for watching. I really appreciate you. If you have any questions or need some help with this, let me know in the comments. I hope it was useful. I have to run. I have to get my son off to school and see if I can get him to learn something, because I never learned how to learn stuff in school. So now it's time for me to try to make him do it. Right? Because that's what we do, I guess. So thank you so much. I really appreciate all of your beautiful faces, and I'll see you in the next time. Take care.